You have also muted yourself, I guess.
Yes, Atul, give me a moment. I'm just sharing the tweets everywhere. Great. So looks like we are live. So hello everyone, welcome to our stream on advanced React patterns. So let me just quickly check if we have viewers and how many of them are there. Okay, so we have got few of them. Let me just quickly check the event on YouTube. Just a second. Okay, so let's see. Great, just setting up. So we have 19 people watching this, and great. So I'm going to just invite all of you, and yeah, here we go. Great. So welcome to our live stream. We are going to talk about advanced React patterns, and we have got a couple of other folks. I'll let them introduce. Before that, I'm Sanket, founder and CEO here at Geeky Ants, and we are trying to do everything that we do at Geeky Ants in the public so that everyone can like read and listen and just we can engage. So over to Atul.
So hello everyone. Really excited to know that we are going to discuss about advanced React patterns. I would like to discuss in detail with both Saurav and Sanket, and then take it forward where and how we can use those patterns. Over to you, Saurav.
Hello everyone, I'm Saurabh, CTO at Geeky Ants. Very excited to be here and discuss about the advanced pattern, when to use them, what's the advantages and disadvantages of when to decide which pattern to use. So yeah, I think let's start, Sanket.
Yeah, as we speak, let me just share this link somewhere so like more folks can join in. Anyway, it'll be recorded and available later, but still, I think we should put it in like, great. So let me just put it in our internal Slack channel first, and then we'll also put it on the Discord. Okay. And where do we do it? Let's see. Maybe Discord. My system is just going a bit crazy with all the streaming options on. But anyway, let me quickly share. Maybe Atul, you can do it meanwhile. Share the link of YouTube on our Discord channel. Great. So why are we doing this? I came across this nice article by Alexis or someone in the React newsletter that Sid runs, tinyreact.email or something. And yeah, so it got my eyes about the 5 patterns that's famous in React, and all these component libraries are doing it. So let's jump right in and try to see like what are those patterns. Great. I think we'll do a little bit of background, but let me share my screen and get going with it. So just a second.
Meanwhile, I'll give a little background about why we actually need little bit of advanced React patterns. I mean, at times we end up spending a lot of time componentizing a lot of different components that we have in our application. But I mean, with the view that we are going to probably reuse it in the application. But sometimes we end up never using them again. I mean, those decisions are important, and some of the problems that we face during the componentization of application, we come across, and then we end up using various different patterns, which solves the problems in hand. So we'll touch upon a few of such patterns that Alexis has mentioned in his blog post, and let's see how and what we can learn from the article,
Great.
from the blog post.
Okay, great. So let the comments come in so that if you have any questions while we walk through this pattern. So this is more of going to be an exploration sort of thing. Like we have not like gone deep into like what are these patterns and how to use it and whatnot. So this is going to be more of an exploration of all three of us and also the audience here. So my system is a bit going bonkers with all the streaming, but I'll try to just do it. Great. So let me just pull it right here and then, okay, I think this should be better. Okay, so this is an article from Alexis Regnaud that appeared in the React Tiny newsletter by Sid. And I'm always excited about like what are the different patterns that like great companies and all these libraries are using. So it's an overview of 5 modern advanced React patterns, including integration codes, pros and cons, and concrete usage within public libraries. The talk and this session is totally going to revolve around these patterns, and we'll have this and probably also open up GitHub a bit because Alexis has uploaded all the patterns in the repo. Great. So yeah, so the first question that this article asks is like, how do I build a reusable component to fit with different use cases?
So before we actually jump into that, let's give a disclaimer to the audience. This is going to be little advanced, and we expect that the audience are aware of basic React concepts.
Great. So let me throw this question to maybe Atul and Saurav. Like, how do I build a reusable component to fit with different use cases? Or before that, maybe a step backward, like why do we need a reusable component in the first place?
I think what advantage React adds is like we can add lot of common components. We can break down our components. For example, you have accordion, which is being in your application across all every part. In every page you have accordion. So what would you do? You won't go there and copy paste each accordion to every pages, right? So what we usually do is we take out that and make a reusable component, say my accordion, and create some props to it. How many tabs we need?
Yeah, makes sense. So, yeah,
the ultimate goal, according to me, is to keep, to keep the data model simple, and also look at the fact where if say I look at the code and say if I delete this part or maybe modify this part, how much of the total application is going to be affected. So if we can answer that, it is going to be, very, very easy to modify or delete a certain code, then I would say we would need componentization in the application.
Okay, so we need reusable component, as the name says, to reuse it. And like, when do we actually decide like, okay, that we need a reusable component? Like if it occurs like once or twice, or like, is there a particular number, Atul or sort of, that you have in mind when you say, okay, now we need to pull it out as a component and then go beyond that?
So from my experience, I would only go and build a reusable component when I end up writing the same piece of code at least thrice. If it
At
is
least thrice.
appearing thrice, then I would go ahead and then rewrite the component and use it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think even at just when I start creating the component, I'll just look around and see if this can be reused, and it will make things easier for me to make changes. If I just make it a component, then I'll go ahead and break down into a reusable component or a component.
Right. Makes
Also-
sense. Or even I would do it like even at the like second instance, but it really depends. Like if I'm in the flow of like building a feature, I would just go ahead and copy paste things and then complete that
Right.
feature and then come back later and maybe
Right.
use
Yeah.
something like
Yes.
that, right?
I agree.
The
It's
flow is very
important.
important. Yeah, the flow is very important for me. It's like an orchestra playing, and then you don't stop and start playing another song, right? It has to flow, and once that ends, then probably you'll come back and then combine it or then refactor and do all those things.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
shipping, we need to ship faster. Plus, we need to think
Yeah.
about like making it reusable.
Correct. I think that's another topic. Probably we'll have another session for that. Like, how do you maintain the pace of shipping versus maintaining the code? Do you like have like 3 or 4 sprints and then have one sprint just for the refactor and code quality or something like that? That's a very subjective and extensive topic. So let's leave that to the next one. Okay, coming back to our topic for the day, advanced React patterns. So this article also talks about, it takes a counter component basically, and then it has counter here that gets I think that's a label. And right before that, we have a button minus, and then a button towards the end, that's plus, and then a number. And we are going to evaluate this use case with different patterns. All right. And there are 2 criteria that this article takes into consideration. The first one is inversion of control, and the second one is implementation complexity. Okay, let's talk about inversion of control. It's also called as IOC. So what do we mean by IOC? Any idea?
I think this is a very. Go ahead.
Saurabh, you can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. You can go ahead.
This is a very, I think, old software design pattern, which is very useful. I think it's been from 60s, 70s, where this is a very old concept, which is brought into React, which is the beauty of React, that it is bringing up the old patterns and like how adding its advantages here, where inversion of control is usually like how much reusability we can give to make reusable component by giving more control to users. Like user can pass in their input to your component, and they can have the more control of how your component is functioning. So I think that's the overall idea of inversion of control.
Right. So it's more of like giving the power to the user of like how they want to control things, instead of the one who has created or built that component instead. Correct?
Yes.
Right. So by the way, users here becomes the consumer of the components. So the users will be developers here.
Yeah. So not to confuse everyone.
Yeah.
So by users, we mean the developers who are consuming these components or these libraries. Okay. So inversion of control gives the power back to the users. So it's more of like separating out the APIs and implementation, and giving a part of the implementation to the users as well, while sticking to the common API.
Yep. And giving a lot of flexibility on the developers end, on the users end.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. Okay, great. I have used IOC a lot, especially in Laravel and Ruby on Rails. So wherein we create aliases and then write the custom implementation of like different interfaces. Okay, object-oriented pattern. Let's not bring that here. Great. Implementation complexity. Okay, so for all the different patterns, we are going to judge on these 2 parameters. Okay, moving forward. The first one is compound components pattern. So this pattern allows creating expressive and declarative components without unnecessary prompt drilling. You should consider using this pattern if you want to make your component more customizable with a better separation of concern and an understandable API. So a quick example would be this. So here we have something called as counter. We are importing just one thing from the file counter, and then we have a component around that, and then we have counter dot decrement, counter dot label, counter dot count, and dot increment. So yeah, so this looks, I don't know, this looks nice, but at the same time weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Atul.
This looks very easy to understand what the component is actually doing, without actually diving into the component that's being imported on the line number 2. So this gives us a clear understanding, reading the code, that okay, there would be a decrement button, there would be a decrement icon, then there is a label, then we are showing the count with the max count to be 10. Then we have the icon for the increment part. So this is pretty descriptive and looks very beautiful as far as the beauty of the code is concerned.
Yeah. Why don't we use like just a simple one-line component counter and pass in all the props on change its current value, max value? Why do we need to?
That's a very good question, and that is that is a con of using this pattern, I believe. The pros is actually giving a lot of flexibility to the users, and obviously the cons part, if we talk about it, is more lines of code here. So that's how I look at it.
So I think, Saurabh, what you mentioned, it's there on the left side, right? So one single component, and it has like different props, and it does a very similar thing to what this example does. So the question is like, why not stick to the left one? Why do we even need the right one? I think the first thing is what Atul mentioned, is like flexibility. You can move around things. You can bring down the decrement and just keep it next to the increment component over here. You can't really reorganize things here, right? So if your use case is like, so say this example, if you want to move this minus next to the plus and then have counter and then 0 on the left side, you can't really do it in this API. So you might, when you want to give the flexibility to the end users to reorganize or reorder the internal components, then this pattern works really well.
Okay. Yeah.
So
that's the new thing.
Is it possible here to replace the label completely and add something else there?
Correct. And that's also one of the cons here, I think. So yeah, so exactly the thing that Atul, that you mentioned, too much UI flexibility. So we can totally replace something with a div, and then it should just work. It would just work because it's taking all those React elements and putting that one after the other. So whatever you want to inject, you can actually inject.
That's kind of a pro. Giving such flexibility is also, it's not actually a con, right? Could be a pro too.
Could be, but if we want to, like, we know that we are not going to change it. This is a simple counter. Then why go ahead and make this more flexible and make some room for bugs?
Good question. So I think this depends on like what is your requirement. If your project has like different types of counters, but they look alike, but they have like different arrangements, so you wouldn't go and create 2 different types of component. Instead, you can use this pattern and then reorder things.
Okay.
If your designer has decided to put the plus at different places in the project, then probably you would use that. So it depends. This is just a simple example. For real complex examples, it would change a lot. For example, I'll give you another example. Say tab component. Sometimes you want to like show the tabs at the bottom. Sometimes you want to show the tabs at the top. So in that case, we would use this pattern where we'll have tabs and then tabs dot maybe tab set dot tabs or something like that, and then tabs dot content. and then we can reorder them if we want to make it top or bottom or bottom or top. Right.
I think
Yeah.
the positive is that
Yeah.
more
Go ahead.
flexibility is always good. Like if you have more flexibility, then at later point of point, it will take me less time to reorganize this, and I can ship faster. That's
Yeah. But the question is like, do we do it from day one or do we refactor it later?
And flexibility becomes important when, say, we are creating a library, and we don't know what sort of application that particular component will be used in. If that
But
is
I
the
think
case,
everybody is building a library. Even within the same project, you are building components for your peers, right? So it's very important to like take care of things like this. But again, boils down to the like what is the current requirement, I guess.
okay, this also solves the problem what we face with probably props drilling and pushing in props to, I mean, through various layers of components. Maybe the props would be passing through different components where it is never used.
Correct.
okay.
And
Even I've seen
you might lose the track of how deep the props are going, and then if someone removes a top layer prop, and then the whole component breaks.
Yeah,
So
I've
that's
seen many times
already
like
a bit of a, yeah.
Yeah, sort of.
number of props increasing, and it's like 60 lines of props. That's I think what's the max number of props should we have to like decide that we need to break down to small
Sort of, I think
component.
we should do a poll from the audience. Let's ask the audience here. So what's the max number of props that a component should have? Go ahead, whoever is watching this, go ahead and type in what's the max number of props that's acceptable when you are building a component. It's a very interesting question. Okay, so Rahul says 5 at max. 5 should be enough. Vinay says 5. Okay. 3 or 4. 7, 8. Okay, depends on the team lead. I'm going to highlight this. One. So Karthik says it depends on the team lead, how many props you should have. Okay, great. So yeah, so we have like most of the people are agreeing somewhere around 5. Like few people say 3, 4. Someone is saying 8, 6 to 7. Okay, makes sense. So yeah, I was reading this book called as Clean Architecture. The first question that book asks is like, how many arguments should a function have? An ideal function should have. And I was surprised the answer was 0 according to that book, that a function should not have any argument, an ideal function. And it's the same case with React component in a very in a very philosophical and high level, right? Because I need something that shouldn't be affected by anything that's coming in the component, right? But that's not the ideal case with us. So 5, 6, I think. Saurabh, what do you say?
Yeah, I think I agree with this. Like 5, 6 is good.
Okay.
Then we need to like use this pattern to break down the component pattern.
Okay, great. Okay, so we need to break it down. Yeah.
And we always talk about when to use a pattern. I mean, we should also talk about when to not use a pattern, and then the way I mean, the Redux documentation was put. The first line was there when you don't need Redux. So similarly, every articles explaining the pattern should have this thing. When do you not need this?
Correct. I have made it sure that we added to all our open source contribution. I think that's also a section that's going in the NativeOS v3, that when you should not use NativeOS v3. So I think that's a mandatory piece of thing that every open source solution or any solution per se should have. That's a very good.
Have that.
Every product should have, right? Yeah. Okay. Keep it away from children.
And that's why we have parents.
Correct.
Stop.
That's
don't need this.
That's why we have solution architects, Atul.
Yeah. And team leads, Karthik.
Great. All right. Moving on. I think so. We have discussed the props that reduced API complexity, because here we had like 5 of them, and then it's pretty reduced, as Saurav mentioned, that we don't need a lot of props. Then we have flexible markup structure that we can move things around. If we need minus plus together, we can move it around and it just works. We can also totally remove few things from here. So separation of concern is like third very important point, that we can have the state at the top level component. So maybe at the counter itself, and then we don't need prop drilling with all the things. Like we don't need to pass in the states. These things can just pick it up from the context using a hook or something, right? So separation of concern is very important point that this one uses. So use counter context and then use it here, and then counter provider, something like that. All right, great. Moving on. Cons, we discussed about it. Too much UI flexibility, heavier JSX. Yeah, heavier JSX. I think Saurav mentioned about this. Yeah,
one line,
because
multiple lines.
Yeah, one line and multiple lines. Is that a con? Okay, that's a con. But I like more code that is clean. That's totally fine. But yeah, makes sense. Criteria, inversion of control, when you use like 25% of inversion of control, 1 or 4, and then implementation complexity 1/4. So this is like the most commonly used pattern, and React Bootstrap uses it, and Reach UI uses it. Both the libraries are pretty famous. Okay, great. If anybody has any question regarding this pattern, then probably we can take up those questions. We are already 26 minutes into this. So compound components pattern. This is being used by React Bootstrap and Reach UI. Great. Okay. So Karthik says it increases DOM depth maybe. I don't think so, Karthik, because this increases the JSX or React elements depth, but not really touches the DOM depth. That may add some extra bit of computation when we are reconciling, but not really on the DOM level. Is that right, Saurav, Atul?
Yep. I think so.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, because even in counter, even if we are just using the one-liner thing, then it will just bring down to the same divs and the pattern. And so even this will just be on the virtual level DOM, it would be have more DOMs, but at deep down DOM level depth would be same.
Yeah, correct. Okay, great. Adarsh is asking where can I get the slides. So Adarsh, this is a recorded session. You can get it later. Okay. So we have Deep asking if we are using something like Formic and we are separating form logic. So Formic implements one of these patterns, I would say.
I think it is control props pattern that Formic uses, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. I think we'll check it out later. And children can be pure components. Can children be pure components? Saurav, Atul.
I didn't really get the question.
So in this pattern, in this pattern, the children like counter increment, counter label, counter.count, are these like pure components?
Yeah, they can be, right? So
yeah. The only thing is that they are reading it from the context if there is a data layer, right?
Right.
It can be a pure component. Okay, moving on. I think let's move on to the next question, next pattern, that is control props pattern. Okay, so what is this pattern about? This pattern transforms your component into a control component. An external state is consumed as a single source of truth, allowing the user to insert custom logic that will modify the default component behavior. Okay, so the state is pulled up in a parent component, and then the children are like control component, much like an input box with a value and on change properties.
Right. So to change the default HTML behavior of probably the form elements and say select buttons, things like that.
Interesting.
It's
okay.
very much the same, like compound components is having the capability of like how to giving more input user, like where they can, how does, like for in this example, how does the change counter work? That flexibility is given to user.
Correct. So in the previous one, we had the idea that we are going to have the counter's state in the parent counter component itself, right? So we didn't have the flexibility to pass in a value. So this counter component was not really a control component, right? Because
Right.
it was hosting the state inside that instance. But we can make use of control props pattern and then pass in a value, right? Value is equal to count, and then we can say handle change counter. So much like a control component wherein we have like value and on change. And now these two things affect everything inside it. And that is done using maybe a context or something. So these pair of this one and this one is controlling the entire state of everything. So this value can be read by all these components, and they can also make change to this component, or maybe send an event to the parent component that actually updates the count and then re-renders this component and gets the new value. Control components, but in this new pattern. So yeah.
Ultimately
So
gives more
I think
control
this
to
is
the
clear, right?
users. Yeah.
Yeah.
Extra
Giving
layer
the,
of control.
yeah. So the previous one gave the control of order, render order, more towards the UI, but this one is like giving control of the state to the end user or the developer,
Right.
right? Okay, great. So
A bit more IOC.
yeah, a bit more IOC. So give more control. That's a pro, definitely. Since the main state is exposed outside your component, the user controls it and can therefore directly influence your component. Okay, all right. Implementation complexity. Before, one integration at a single place was enough to make your component working. Now it will be spread over 3 different places. One is we have to define the state, we have to define the on-change thing, and then we have to use it in the JSX. So that's a bit of complexity that's added. But I think this is for the good. This is really nice, because I'm a big fan of like in React, everything should be as controlled as possible instead of like having their own state, right?
The cons mentioned here are not actually cons. They are somewhat some are for good as actually.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it depends on the use case. So in some cases where our counter is working very fine and we know that it is going to behave in that way only, then there's no point in giving more control to the end user of the component. But in some
Hmm.
cases, we want to give more control.
Correct.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So criteria, I think when you need more inversion of control, like 2 out of 4, and then implementation complexity is like 1/4. Okay. So material UI uses this pattern. Okay. I think they use it with some of their like state controlled accordions or something. Material UI. Not really sure, but yeah, need to dig into the API. Great.
Never
Any
used it.
more thoughts here, Saurabh, Atul?
No, that's all. I mean, it's all revolving around how much flexibility we can impart to the developers and
Mhm.
improve their, developer experience.
Right.
Correct.
It
All right.
boils down to
Let's.
when to use it, and like at what
Correct.
time should we
Yeah.
decide
That's
that we
that's a
need.
separate, huge discussion point.
But I think sort of asks the right question. Like all these things are great. These books and these patterns are like written and used across multiple projects. But when should you use it? Like, do you
Right.
use it for a to-do application that you're building in, or would you ever use it for a side project that you want to complete in the weekend, right? So yeah, maybe Karthik got the answer right. It depends on the team lead.
No, I think when we are building some libraries, like for example, Material UI, it has to give lot of flexibility to the user. Or if we are building a form component which is getting used across the entire project, we need lot of flexibilities there, right? And if we just make it a simple form component, then things will start breaking out. People will start using creating their own components. So it's very important to think from that perspective, that if you have something which is highly reusable across your application, add more flexibility.
Hmm. I think we usually create a components folder, right, in every project. And whenever we are doing that, we should ask these questions. I think these 5 patterns, we should just go over each one of them and ask, like, do we need this feature in that component that I have just pulled it out? Is that just maybe a UI thing? Then we don't need. Does it have a state, or does it have? Do we want to give the flexibility of moving things around? So all these things are really important when we are working on large projects, like even like beyond 5 people team. I think we should take these things into consideration. But again, it has to be documented well at the same time. If there is
Yeah,
no
let's
documentation of the project that you're working on, then you wouldn't realize that, okay, what are the different patterns or APIs available for you, right?
let's write a cheat sheet about it,
Yeah.
so that whenever we are going to write a component, we go and look into it if we really need it.
Right. Okay, I think we can move on to the next one. Let's move on to custom hook pattern. I have been using something like this a lot lately.
Yeah, a very very good addition to the React ecosystem actually.
Custom hook pattern. I think before custom hooks, we were using HOCs,
Right.
and we were wrapping our components so that it gets the right value. And again, getting the types in there was like a nightmare. This solves it really well. So instead of giving the context straight away, we can wrap our context in a hook, and then that hook gives us like functions to create or say update the values in that context, right? So the entire thing is wrapped in a very nice thing called as use counter. And then we are using this use counter somewhere, and then count, handle increment, handle decrement. And we can pass it around like wherever we want to do it. Like say, okay, count is passed here. And then if we want like granular things like control, like even the lowest level API, on click of a decrement, I will handle decrement. On click of increment, I'll handle increment. And then I can create my own div over here and then pass in on click of that, I want to increment that. So I get like full flexibility on this.
Handle any
Right.
sort of custom logic that needs to be implemented. Maybe on incrementation, I just don't need the value to be incremented. I also need a siren to be played, so I can implement that here.
Right. One more advantage I'm looking here is like someone else can implement the hook here, like the handle increment, handle count in this example. Someone else can jump in and just give that to the other team who is building the counter component. So that gives a very good control over this.
Right, delegation of work is easier here
More
in this pattern.
So we can give this API to a developer and say, go ahead and build a hook called as use counter that gives me 3 things: count, handle increment, and handle decrement. And then it's that developer's responsibility to implement that, right? Is that what you're trying to say, Saurabh?
Yes.
Okay, and that's a very nice way, a beautiful way of like separating the things. And it is only like possible with the great things around React hooks.
Can we see how the use counter hook is implemented?
Yes, I will just
There is a code
try
somewhere.
it. So it's not available here, but
It's probably it will be in GitHub, I guess.
let's
Yeah,
see.
the
Let's
link.
see in the example. It's on a different tab. Just a second, I'll share the other tab. Let me. Okay. Let's try. So we have use counter. So use counter is a hook that creates a state initial counter, and then it handle increment and handle decrement. These things are doing like straight away like use a state thing.
Okay, and it's exporting these 3 values. Count, handle increment, and handle decrement. Yep.
Correct. And then this must be hosted somewhere Okay, do we need a context for this? Use counter context. We have a context. So we create a context and then we're just passing it down there. Let's see how this one is used in the component tree. So usage. So we have counter.
This is the same code that's there on the article.
Yeah, but where are we using this thing? The context. Do we need a context with this?
Not sure.
If
I
we
don't
need to share the set,
so here we have
this example.
count, but is that setting up things? Okay, so it must be setting up in the parent counter. Yeah. Okay, so we have the counter provider. So
Ankit, can you zoom in a bit? Zoom in a bit, if you can.
Sorry. Okay. So let me get back to the use counter hook that we have. So this one doesn't use any context. So this one is straight away, there's a normal user state and then exposes this state over here. And then we have a couple of functions here. Okay, and this straight away can be used in the example. So we can go ahead and import, say, use counter, and then spread these 3 properties over here and then pass it down wherever we need it. Yeah, and this count is being consumed in the count with a context that is set here in the counter component. So this is a local state. This takes in the prop, sets up this counter component, sets up the context, and then that is being consumed over here. Great. So 2 level of things. Great. I think we have some questions. So Shanko has a funny question, but he might be serious. Who knows? What if someone still prefers HOCs over hooks? You can totally use it, Shanko. Great. And it's Shanko Deep. I call him Shanko.
HOCs are gone. It's like white walkers.
Okay. So we have more questions. Okay. So screen size bigger, and then in class complete when we do set state, we have 2 parameters for passing value, and other is for the callback function. Okay. What is the best way to do it in functional components? Okay, we'll take that question later. I think we're just talking about functional components right now. Okay, good comments coming in. I think people use this a lot. Anurag has something to say. We can delegate the component state and A11Y logic inside the hooks and compose over those hooks. Yeah, that's another good example, I would say. And Rekit also uses the hooks API for their components. And okay, great. Yeah, I follow you, Anurag, on Twitter. You're doing an amazing job. Thank you. Great. So this pattern looks good. So I'm just going to share the last tab again. Okay.
I mean, this pattern of discussion is also good. We are learning lot of new concepts from the audience too.
Yeah, I think that is a very good way of like exploring stuff. We can just, whenever you get a new topic, just go live and share it with people, learn, and then get questions from people and learn from them as well. Good. So custom hook pattern is very nice. I love it. Just expose the state and then start using it, and then give like limited control to the users. This is more like a middleware on low level state, I would say. Like you can use these functions to also process the data and then just set a specific thing to count itself. So I really like that pattern, more of a middleware or something. Great. Moving on. I'm just going to do this. Okay, great. So pros of this: the user can insert his own logic between the hook and the JSX element. For example, if I want to do more things like handle click, I think Saurav mentioned about this one. If I want to, or Atul, you mentioned that if I want to blow a siren with increment, we can do that. Yeah. Correct. So developers code is like use counter, and then these are the things Great. Cons, implementation complexity. Since the logic part is separated from the rendering part, it is the user who must link both. A good understanding of how your component work is required to correctly implement it. Okay, interesting. It's getting a bit complicated when we add all these things one by one, right? So use counter. So we have a separate hook and a separate component, which has some more compound components, and we are trying to map things in between. So the arrows that we see, we have full control over those arrows. So we can inject anything in between. And that's the only thing that we are trying to do here, that give more power to the user so that they can like break these arrows and put their own logic, or maybe move these JSX in and around. Is that a correct understanding, Saurabh? Atul?
Right. So,
Yeah.
so for example, if we need, I mean, the increment to work in a manner where we want to increment by 5 maybe. So, what approach are we going to take? We can reuse the same counter component, just the logic is changing and the values.
Its implementation would be like a bit of challenge for everyone, whoever is the end user who is going to use the component. That's a con, I think.
So if it is going to be difficult, Saurabh, then probably we should ask that in the interviews. Great. So I think, yeah, inversion of control 2x4, implementation is 2x4. So React table and React hook form. I've used React hook form, and yeah, so it uses the hook to populate the values, and then the ref that goes back to this one. It uses that. React table I have not used personally, but yeah, interesting pattern. And that's the beauty of React. Like, it's not a templating engine. You can move things around and make it more like all these patterns, right? So that is very nice. So Harsh is asking, what does 2x4 mean? I assume it's like 50% inversion of control, or maybe the difficulties, or maybe it checks like 2 out of 4 boxes for both the things. I hope that's my understanding. I hope that's correct.
Yeah,
Great.
even I think so.
I think that's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It is giving a score out of 4, I guess.
Okay. So let's look back at all the patterns, just to recap for anyone who joined late. First pattern is compound components pattern. So this one, you can import just one component or one particular construct, and then that gives you the power of like multiple components or multiple related components, like counter and counter.decrement, .label, .count, .increment, and you can use it. And then the second one is, sorry, did I miss something?
The control component.
Second one is control props pattern. So here we try to make the state or the data of that particular component controlled, like just like a control component. So the state is handled, and then we pass in a pair of value and on change. That makes it controlled. Then the third one is custom hook pattern. This is to get more control over the data layer of your component. So for counter, you may do something like a use counter counterpart hook, that, and we can use these two in conjunction. One provides the data, another provides the UI. And yeah, so we can use it like this, use the state, and then use the JSX, and then get going from there. Great. Moving on to the fourth one, props getters pattern. Props getters pattern. Okay, I think I've used this somewhere. Custom hook pattern gives great control, but also makes your component harder to integrate, because the user has to deal with a lot of native hooks props and recreate the logic on his side. The props getter pattern attempts to mask this complexity instead of exposing native props. We provide a short list of props getters. Okay, I think I've seen this in one of the form libraries somewhere. What was the library before Formic, Saurabh, that we used to use for forms?
Redux
forms?
Yeah, Redux forms. So we used to spread something in the input box, right? Spread the props or something like that. Okay, let's see an example. So now they have changed use counter, hook, and now we are getting these three things instead of increment, handle increment, and handle decrement. We are getting get counter props, get increment props, and get decrement props instead
Okay,
of
that's
those
really
functions
functional.
directly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and these things are spread on these components. So if you see decrement, instead of doing something like on change and then writing the handle on change or handle decrement function, we are just straight away spreading it. So now this function can give us like multiple uh, props to the decrement thing, so we can inject a lot more things here, right? So we don't really need to remember the prop that we need to pass to decrement, like on change, and then pass the callback function. We can just do this. Same thing goes with the increment as well.
So
Interesting.
what are we going to achieve with this? I mean, any use case?
So in the previous one, we had to import handle increment and handle decrement. And there could be more than one prop that we need to pass to these components. There could be like 5 of them. With this, you
Makes
can
sense,
inject
makes
all
sense, yeah.
5 of them in the function itself. This function, when you execute this function, it gives you an object with a lot of props and values are against that, and then you can spread it straight away here.
Makes sense, yeah.
This looks much
So
cleaner.
in the case we have lot of more props in, then we can use this pattern. Is it?
Yeah, correct. Sort of, you're right.
Okay.
And then we can also modify things. So what we can do is we can spread this and then put a comma, or maybe just have few more props over here that overrides this one. So we don't really need to remember like those 5 props that's needed to make this work. But when we want to override, we can just write one more prop over here that overrides it.
Okay, yeah.
Perfect, yeah.
Right? Okay. So I think Aniket is saying that he has used this pattern in React Aria. Yes, I think we also have this in React Native Aria that we built. So pretty nice. Great. Yeah, so yeah, I think we have the function call and we can again overload few things, which is great. Get increment prop also takes in an object. Nice. And then we can do a few more things. Interesting approach, right?
Very interesting.
Any thoughts around it? Any thoughts around it?
Yeah, I
Anurag
think
says something.
when thing. Okay, let's go over the question.
Yeah.
Not really a question. He's suggesting. Can you just pull the comments, Sanket?
Let me just do it like this. Okay. Anurag says, yes, also another thing is that with props getter, we can pass some metadata inside those get increment methods. Like, okay, so Anurag is talking about this thing. Yeah, this one. So we can actually pass some metadata.
Yeah.
So that works really well. I think that is because since this is a function call now, we can pass in anything from this component or our own custom logic inside this, and that gets attached to the things that this is sending, and then that gets added to the proper button. Interesting. So this is another level of IOC, I would say. Good point. Great. Moving on. Pros: ease of use. Provide an easy way to integrate your components. The complexity is hidden. The user just had to connect the correct getter, and then it works. Like this one. Okay, interesting. And flexibility, the user still has the possibility of overloading the props contained in the getters. So this is what Anurag mentioned.
Great.
Cons: lack of visibility. The abstraction brought by the getters makes your component easier to integrate, but also more opaque and magic. To correctly override your component, the user has to know the list of props exposed by getters. But I think that can be done by a simple console log, right? Yeah. Not really a con, but yeah, all these con are like right on the edge. So if you get it right, that's not really a con.
And if we use typings, then we can
correct. Yeah, with typings it becomes really easy.
Very easy, yeah.
So inversion of control is 3 by 4 because we have checked one more box here. Integration complexity 3 by 4. Yes. Yeah. Downshift uses it, correct, and Reactable also uses it. Interesting pattern. But I think I'm getting back to the question that Saurabh continuously asked. When do you do this? But good stuff. Okay. Any
To
more
show
thoughts
off,
around this?
you can,
Yeah.
to show off your coding
Yeah.
skills, you can use this.
No, I think this is a very counter example, the way explained, but for a more complex scenarios, when we'll get into a lot of real production application, things are getting more complicated and we have to build something. Can't think of an example right now, but for some very complex scenarios, then this would help a lot.
Yeah, I can
I
think
think
of a use case. Yeah.
Yeah, I can also think of a use case where just the counter example itself. Like when you go on Amazon, sometimes you, get combo items. You can order only multiple items, where it checks if the user is adding 2 items or not, things like that. Those complexities, those calculations can be brought into the what do you say, custom logic that we are implementing.
Correct. Makes sense. All right. I think the last pattern, I think we have around 4 minutes, but I think we'll extend it for another 5 minutes to cover everything, or maybe the questions that people might have watching this video. Great. The fifth pattern is a state reducer pattern, the most advanced pattern in terms of IOC. It gives an advanced way for the user to change how your component operates internally. The code is similar to custom hook pattern, but in addition, the user defines a reducer which is passed to the hook. This reducer will overload any internal action of your component. Interesting. So that's a bit too much, I would say. So we are creating a reducer over here with this, and we can then return the next state, right? And that reducer is passed down to use counter. So now our custom reducer augments everything that happens inside use counter hook. So all the state changes go via our custom logic that's in the function. So why to use that component at all? Just write everything here.
This is a lot of
That's
this is a
when I
lot
was
of fun.
thinking, if everything end user is going to do.
Yeah, where are you going to stop the users? Like, don't do this, don't do that.
I'll write my own React.
Interesting, but I think I have never encountered a use case for this, to be honest, but I can see that there are use cases when you are doing a lot of data changes and also give the power to the end user, right? Super overkill for a counter example, Anurag says. Yes. Great.
Yeah.
Thoughts here? Saurabh, Atul, any
This
more
is the
thoughts?
thought.
Yeah, even I'm on the same lines with Anurag.
Yeah. But when you're doing something like, say, really complex, like a data table, or maybe a user auth sort of thing, you want to store the user's state, but also want to show them something, or maybe handle their, say, some status in your application level.
Maybe say, for example, if we have some onboarding process for user registration, multiple steps of onboarding, can we
I think Aniket has a very nice. Aniket has a use case for this. Aniket says handlers handle. Handlers handle. That's a very nice way of saying things. Like, we have handlers, and if you want to handle those handlers, we can use a reducer pattern. Or what is this pattern called? State reducer pattern, correct? Makes sense when you want to augment the behavior. I think we were anyway doing this behavior augmentation in the previous custom hook pattern, because we can anyway do it there. But if you want to do it more in a functional way, then I think the reducer pattern makes more sense, right?
I'm really not able to think of real case example, I mean, real world example.
Yeah, if you want to decrement like by 2, right? So you can use this one. Like decrement should not decrement by 1, but it should decrement by 2 every time you click on decrement. So we are able to augment the behavior of the real decrement that we had. Yeah.
But why can't
Yeah,
we
I
do this
feel
with the custom hooks pattern itself?
We can do it, but we'll be taking the function and then wrapping that in our own function. That would be less of a declarative way of doing things. So custom hook pattern, you get this handle increment and handle decrement. So we'll have to do it something like this, right? We are creating a wrapper function and then putting our custom logic, right? But in this case, what we are going to do is, I'm losing a track of things. Okay, it's over here. So here we are not creating that intermediate function because everything comes here and then we can totally override that.
All right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
I think I used something like this in an object-oriented world inside JavaScript, inside React itself. But yeah, we did something like this. When we were doing React pluggable, we built something very similar. Because React pluggable itself lets you augment the behavior of all the dispatches. So we built something like this. Again, this is a very specific and advanced use case, I would say. Okay, great. Moving on. Pros give more control. In the most complicated cases, state reducer is the best way to leave control to the users. All your internal components actions are now accessible from the outside and can be overridden. That's the thing. Okay. Cons: implementation complexity. This pattern is surely the most complex to implement both for you and for the end user. Lack of visibility, since any reduces action can be changed. A good understanding of the component's internal logic is required. Correct. Inversion of control, like everything. So your component is not your component anymore. Users can do anything with that. And then integration complexity is like 4x4. Downshift uses this. Okay, so conclusion. I think that's a very nice conclusion here. And this is the thing that,
Yeah, this is the thing what Sora was waiting for, I guess.
yeah. So integration complexity and inversion of control. If you want to like give 100 to the user's state reducer, or if you've just started with a combination of things, compound components or control props works makes more sense. I use custom hooks a lot. I'm not sure about anything else, but I use custom hooks a lot. Anything else?
Custom hooks, I mean, these days, most of the applications are implementing.
Correct. Okay, I think we have. Yeah.
I saw a tweet from Sid about custom hooks today. Let me just find out what was that. Maybe that would help us.
Yeah, I
You
think
can go ahead. I'll just
Anurag says it. Custom hooks just sits right in the middle. Perfect, I would say. Correct. Good stuff. So those watching, if you have any questions, we are almost towards the end of the session. And if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. I think there are a lot of people watching from Geeky Ants. So if you have any question, so this is supposed to be an internal thing, right? But we have just streamed it live. So anyone who has any questions who's watching, go ahead and ask your questions. We will just try to answer it because everybody is a learner. Yeah, okay. I think we've got first question. Custom hooks pattern can overcome use of Redux to handle state globally. Okay. Thoughts on this? Saurav has a question and actually a suggestion that if we use custom hook pattern, we can overcome Redux to handle global states. Makes sense? Yeah. Not really custom hooks pattern, but state reducer, I think, is what Saurav is talking about.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, next question. How much it covers solid? Okay, solid principles. Back to the fourth semester of software engineering. Go ahead. Okay, let me pull up the words of solid principles, all the 5 things. Mhm. So the 5 principles, let me just pull it here. Okay. On the other screen, let me just scroll it to the top so that, okay, great. So single responsibility principle of solid, yes, it does. I think the hooks and the JSX, it does. Open close principle, yes. Substitution principle also somewhat, yes. Interface segregation principle, yes. Dependency inversion principle, that is again IOC itself. So more or less, I think we've checked all the boxes of solid with these patterns. Saurav, Atul, thoughts?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
yeah, we've
it
covered.
covers all those like advanced pattern software design patterns. Very interesting.
Great. Okay. Then we have next question. I think I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and then get back to questions. Okay. Now this one works well. Just a second. I'm going to pull it. Okay, great. Does it be controlled by another component using same custom hook? I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Sorry, Atul.
Same here. I didn't understand it.
Can it be
Component
controlled by
Control
another
another
component?
component. Not really
I think it's pretty
understanding the
flexible. Like the hook is not bound to be used with a particular component, so you can use a hook and then pass into another set of components. It should just work fine. I hope that is what Saurav is trying to ask. Oh, the ultimate question is here. What is this class about?
This is
So we
function
are
order.
Saurav,
This is group
what
study.
This is a
group study.
functional component, no class. Just
Saurav has cracked the React joke. Great. Sorry, I muted myself. If you have any more questions, go ahead and shoot it. We have about 105 viewers watching this. I love the session overall. I really like exploring things with people who are like-minded. I really like it. So I think we should do it often.
Yeah, really.
a lot of takeaways. Even I'm going to use a lot of these patterns now. Like the
A
latest
lot
one.
of
It's
giveaways
very
from the audience too.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Great. So I think Atul, we have started this, or we have started this. Atul, you are leading this. Like we are going to do more of like help everyone who are trying to enter the React world or the front end or full stack world, right?
Correct.
So this is more of an advanced topic. Like I think we should do more of a beginner friendly topics.
Yeah, we'll have such sessions more frequently, and the notifications would be sent to the Discord channels.
Yeah, I'm just going to type the Discord channel. So learn.thetopgeek.com. Okay, so whoever is watching, go ahead and join the Discord channel, and then we can talk there and notify you guys over there. All right, I think we have few more questions, but we are almost towards the end. We can take this last question maybe.
So Nitish has a question. He says,
Okay.
out of these,
Nitish has a question. Sorry, okay, I missed.
okay,
Okay, let me highlight Nitish's question. Out of these, which would you try to implement in your projects? Go ahead.
I think the custom hook pattern, I think that lies in the between, not too tight and not too loose. I think
the
that's the
ultimate answer in the software world depends.
depends on the team lead.
Custom hooks
Yeah.
looks, really, really useful. It has kind of both pros and cons, which is in balance. Not much of implementation complexity, at the same time a lot of flexibility too.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
Now this is a it depends question.
Right.
Great. So I think that's all for now. I loved this session overall. It was not one way. It was like a group exploring things together. So I really like the overall format. So let's do this a few more times. I think we'll do more of beginners or entry level things for everyone. We are going to also open up more of like if you are new to coding or trying to learn JavaScript or React, we're going to do that. So join our Discord channel. That's learn.thetopgeek.com, and we're going to chat more. Follow all these handles like Geeky Ant and everything, and then we are going to let you know whenever we have the next session. All right.
Perfect. A great session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Be
Thanks,
safe.
Ankit. Bye.
Thanks. Yeah.